Hey guys, what's going on? My name is Dr. 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐸, and thank you so much for being here with us. This is the Thrive Bites podcast, and welcome to season 5. Here we talk about 3 things: plant-powered living, enhancing emotional resilience, and creating a thriving mindset. And I interview the most passionate guests here, ranging from physicians to coaches to dietitians to entrepreneurs. And my hope is to give you really informative and high-valued conversations. So please follow us here on YouTube, Spotify, Apple, and wherever you hear your podcasts. Come on in, and I can't wait to see you inside. Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites. For this episode, I am interviewing Cheyne Towers, and he is a great individual. We talk a lot about self-liberation from our thoughts, that communication, that talk, that chatterbox that we have, that creates these self-limiting, beliefs. And I think it's a great episode. It really dives really deep into, how we treat ourselves at the end of the day and how we've evolved as a human being, with that, and what kind of implications, complications, and effects it's had in our lives. So Cheyne Towers is, an amazing individual, very multifaceted. So, I definitely invite you to join us on this conversation. And please be sure to hop onto Apple Podcasts and rate Thrive Bites and give us, a thumbs up, 5-star rating. I really appreciate it if you do so. So on to the next episode. Okay, guys. Well, welcome to another episode of Thrive Bites podcast. I'm your host, Dr. 𝐒𝐿𝐴𝐻𝐸, and thank you so much for being here. You could have been anywhere in the world, and you've decided to spend just a few moments with us today, and I am eternally grateful. So today we have a wonderful guest for today's session. His name is Cheyne Towers, and he is a London-based hypnotherapist. He has been helping people to transform how they speak towards themselves for the best part of 2 decades. And I don't know about you, but we all have this monkey brain and chatterbox and internal dialogue that we have. And through his processes, he's developed a simple yet profound understanding. He has successfully helped many who have suffered trauma, abuse, depression, and anxiety. He is also the co-founder of the Dialogue of Self-Liberation, and he loves sharing his practical transformational system online, helping people to develop the mindfulness of self-communication and nurture self-forgiveness and self-compassion. He is also hosting the Dialogue for Self-Liberation through global community calls, where he provides continuing support to people around the world who wish to improve and enhance the quality of their self-communications. And he is also a lifelong martial artist, develops seated Qigong for people with mobility challenges, and also teaches workshops at Sword Punk Traditional Weapons Traditional Weapons Training Festival in the UK. So without further ado, please welcome Cheyne Towers. Hey, hello.
Hello there, Colin. Very good to see you, sir. Thank you very much for inviting me onto your podcast.
I am very stoked for you to be here. And please let us know where you are calling from.
Well, in the information that you read out there about me, it said that I'm a London-based therapist. Well, I was for 17 years or so, but I've moved recently to Glastonbury in Somerset in the United Kingdom, which is where I'm speaking to you from now. Just if you've seen Glastonbury Tor, the hill with the tower on it, it's just over there. Yeah,
that's awesome. I've yet to really fully immerse myself into the UK and surrounding areas, so I'll definitely need a map. So number one, thank you so much for coming onto the show, taking the time out to share with us a little bit about what you do. And I find your work very interesting. And when we had connected offline, you delve a lot deeper into not just mindfulness, that, all of us have some, good broad understanding of, but you talk deeper into self-communications, the internal dialogue, what you created is called the Dialogue for Self-Liberation. And I find that very fascinating. So I like to have my guests talk about their origin story. So what was the inspiration for you to go into the field to really help others navigate this self-communication I like to call the chatterbox? I like to call, this monkey brain that we have, this internal dialogue that we have, to ultimately create TDSL, or the dialogue of self-liberation. How did that get started for you?
Okay, thank you. That's a lovely question to start with. So I never wanted to be a therapist, and the thought never really entered my head. But I had the good fortune to be introduced to a man who became my teacher as a therapist. His name was Vernon Bell. He's more famously known as the founding father of the British karate movement here in 1957. But he was also a founder member of the British Association of Therapeutic Hypnotists in 1951. It's the oldest regulatory body for hypnotherapy in the United Kingdom. And one day he just plainly, bluntly asked if I wished to study with him, study hypnotherapy in particular. And he was constantly studying himself in his living room. He had all over the walls in frames certificates of his continued professional learning and development dating back from the 1950s. And so I started to study with him, but I had no idea what I'd be in for. I studied with him for the last 4 years of his life, and he was very skillful in the way he worked with me. In order to study with him, he basically took me through a process, and this process helped me to identify how I'd been communicating toward myself through replaying old hurtful memories of past upsets and traumas, and experiences of abuse of one kind or another, and or else imagining a future in which I continued to feel rubbish about myself. I've always been a glass half full person. Anyone that's known me for a long time would probably describe me like that, an optimist by nature. But unbeknown to anybody else, in the background, when I was on my own, never in the company of other people, but when I was on my own, I became very spiteful toward myself in the way I was speaking to myself about myself. I picked up certain beliefs about myself due to experiences I had in my past, and those unconsciously set up patterns of very self-depreciating and eventually self-abusive patterns of self-talk. And I became very skillful at beating myself up quietly in the background and giving myself a very hard time in the way I spoke to myself about myself. I picked up certain stories that I would reinforce. I would unconsciously be reinforcing by communicating repetitively over and over in my mind about these very negative or self-limiting or self-defeating stories. Yeah. And I believed that I knew myself very, very well, and that life had just taught me this is who I am, this is how life is, this is what life has taught me, and therefore this is how it's always going to be. Mm. But I didn't realize I was doing it. So Vernon, who was my teacher, he took me through a process. Firstly, he helped me to understand that if we wish to learn from our past, then and stop repeating the same old patterns and re-experiencing the same old upsets and trauma, then we need to understand how to stop communicating toward ourselves or toward other people about our past suffering as if it's happening again now in the present tense, or as if it's going to happen again in the future. And we set ourselves up with the expectation and the assumption. We program our subconscious by speaking about the future in a particular way, which is self-limiting or self-abusive or self-pitying or self-defeating. but we don't realize that that's what we're doing, because it's a very subtle skill which we've developed over the years of speaking about the past as if it were the present or the future.
Mm.
And I spent 20 years or more of my life doing exactly that, and I became very skillful at giving myself a hard time. So he helped me to identify those patterns, and then taught me how to let go of the habit of communicating in those ways toward myself. And yeah, sure enough, over time, it's totally transformed my use of language, the way I use words, the way I communicate, not only to myself, but in general to people. And I've been working professionally for 20 years now, helping people by passing on the understanding he passed on to me, to the people that come to see me for help.
Yeah, I think that's very, very interesting. I love how you basically were able to kind of sit, with yourself, with your teacher, and recollect, recount, process, go through all these different types of past traumatic experiences in one shape or another, and being able to almost like witness it from the outside looking in. I like to use the analogy of like a snow globe, and you have this snow globe of this internal dialogue that we each say to ourselves. I think in a day we have, I think, upwards of like 70,000 thoughts a day that we kind of go through. And I'm sure probably a lot more than what we would like to admit to is directed towards ourselves in more of a negative fashion as opposed to a positive fashion. So based off of that, my question would be, if you are willing to, can you share like some specific examples of, I guess, some experiences that you have gone through, and how did that become this repeating negative self-limiting belief? Like what beliefs would you go into specifically, for us to kind of have a better understanding?
Okay. This is a very common thing that over the years I've noted as a very self-limiting pattern that people pick up, or a belief about themselves. And this is one of the ones that was a main thing for me, was that I believed that I was broken, and that I was not good enough, and that I was a failure in relationships, that relationships didn't work for me. And this was as a result of having just, I could say randomly, but maybe there was a certain element of fate in this. I'll come back to that. I'll park that, and I'll come back to that a little later. That I ended up from a young age in relationships with women that basically had a number of patterns themselves and habits themselves, and I ended up experiencing betrayal, lies and deceit, rejection, and the accumulation of those experiences over time led me to believe, or to adopt the belief, that it must be my fault, because there's obviously something wrong with me, and that conventional relationships don't work for me. They never work for me, because I don't obviously deserve to find love and happiness in my life, because there must be something wrong with me. And the thing was, you see, I ended up replaying old memories of things that had happened in the past, hurtful, spiteful things that were said or done, upsetting experiences here and there. And there were a lot of them, and it really accumulated. But I would replay those memories over and over and torment myself with them. And in my creative imagination would go off on many offshoots of the possibilities that if only I would have said something different, if only I would have acted in a different way or reacted differently, if only I hadn't have done that, then I wonder what would happen. Then I go off in my imagination, imagining all kinds of variations on what may have gone differently. But ultimately, they were all equally tormenting and upsetting. So I was just prolonging the torment, finding many inventive new ways to beat myself up and justify the belief that I picked up along the way that it must be my fault because there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
This has been a pattern over the years. I've worked with many people who've been in abusive relationships, or people, let's stick to that for now, people who've been in abusive relationships. And all too often, the person who's been abused becomes conditioned to accept the belief that it's their fault somehow. It's because they do this that they get beaten, or because they don't do such and such a thing that they get beaten or abused. And then they come to normalize it, and they accept those patterns and those beliefs, and they adopt those beliefs, and then they're conditioned sometimes beyond the end of that relationship, and then things repeat themselves because the person may be saying to themselves, well, I don't deserve love, I don't deserve anything but the kind of treatment that I've always got, because it must be because there's something wrong with me. And then they would go from one abusive partner to another abusive partner, maybe in a different form.
Yeah, just repeats the pattern.
Yeah, until we understand the responsibility we have toward ourselves and the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves.
From your experiences and expertise, why is it, we hold on? I mean, this is my theory, presumption, is why do we hold on to trauma more than, I guess, quote unquote, good experiences or positive experiences? Why do we hold on to trauma more? Does it have to do more with, I guess, our evolutionary state, coping mechanisms or, survival mechanisms? Or is there a kind of like a deeper underlying, I guess, understanding to it?
Well, I'm going to offer this as a potential answer to that, a possible answer to that question. And this came from a very dear friend of mine. We were discussing this subject. His name's Paul. And I really do think that there's something in this, that from a very young age, we're praised for holding on as a small child if we're wearing nappies. And then we're trying to be trained to use the toilet. If we don't hold on, we get told off. If we hold on until we're going to the toilet, then we get praised because we've managed to hold on, and then you can release in the appropriate way. But I think that there is some kind of very deep-rooted conditioning in that way. At school, we're taught to hold on to facts. Times tables and things like this, facts and figures, and we're praised for that. We're not taught how to let go. We're not taught how to lose. So everyone wants to be a winner. And no one wants to be seen in the eyes of others as, or perceived as, a loser or a failure, or to have made a mistake. And sometimes, people will swear blind that they haven't made a mistake. Yeah. And they'll blame it on everyone else but themselves because they do not have the humility or the capacity to look at themselves and admit that they have made a mistake or failed or been beaten. And they pretend otherwise rather than accept responsibility for their own mistakes. Now, there was a saying attributed to a very famous Tai Chi master called Professor Cheng Man-ching, who used to say, apparently very often, he used to say, invest in loss. It's at the times where we make mistakes that we have the maximum capacity to learn and to grow and to improve ourselves. If we look at the mistakes and think, we're prepared to think, yeah, I failed there, or I was beaten then, or I made a mistake. So how
Mhm.
can I learn from observing how that happened so that I no longer make that kind of mistake as I did then?
Mhm.
And it's through our failures that we grow. And,
Yeah, for
I
sure.
think the proliferation of the human being is an example, great example of how we can survive, we can grow and evolve in spite of the
Mhm.
fact that we've made plenty of mistakes in the past. But
For
I
sure.
think culturally, we've become conditioned to, the thought of failure or having made a mistake is somehow abhorrent to people. They don't.
Mm.
People lose face. It's a very common thing in certain cultures. It's almost the
Yeah.
worst kind of thing is to lose face in front
Yeah,
of other
for
people.
sure. For sure,
Yeah.
yeah.
Um,
Coming from a Chinese background,
mm,
there's very, very, obvious examples. Whether, and this could be an entirely different episode, but like, whether
mm,
it's with Mark's academics, with career goals,
mm,
with different achieving certain types of social status, hierarchy, things like that. And if you're unable in the eyes of others within your cultural slash ethnic group, then in a way you're kind of cast aside. You're not really.
mm,
I was saying this to another person. It's almost as equivalent as your worthiness as a human being. If you don't
yes.
achieve X, Y, and Z in either making a certain amount of money, social class, career,
Mm,
job, things like that, it's almost like, it's equated by your worthiness as a human being. And that's
mm,
very, very interesting, right? Obviously, different people from various life
mm,
experiences, cultural backgrounds have different viewpoints on it.
mm,
But I do find it very interesting how you're saying that societally, as our modern society, we don't really put too much pause and understanding, processing, learning ultimately from missteps, mistakes, and failures. And
mm,
it's really, there's more of a negative light to it, and we don't really go deeper into it. And I think it's a very important discussion and conversation, from honestly from out of the womb. I think the earlier the better, for us to really evolve um, more mentally, socially, as human
mm.
beings. So, so I
Yes.
appreciate that.
So based on what you were saying, here's an example, a real world example of somebody that came to see me for help some time ago, who was told by a parent who really the parent only wanted them to focus and do the very best and to get the best grades possible and get the best job possible with earning the most money and so on. So their motivation was good, but at the time, this young person was about 16 years old and had been told by the father that if you continue to enjoy yourself, then you will be a failure in your professional career.
Yeah.
So consequently, this person who ended up when I was helping them in their 60s had spent the whole adult life
Hmm.
disallowing themselves pleasure
Mm.
and fun,
Hmm.
and had ended up believing that they can't have that because they haven't achieved the success that they are meant to achieve.
Hmm.
And
Hmm.
yet were obviously very successful. But you see, it was almost like the programming caused them to believe that it was never enough and that they weren't allowed to enjoy themselves because if they did, then they would never achieve that goal.
Hmm. Hmm. Hmm.
And to carry
Yeah.
around such a belief for the majority of one's adult life, from 16 to 60 something.
It's
But this is what people do.
yes, exactly. Exactly. Um, how would you say before we go into, your overall process, after your years of learning and, tutelage from your teacher,
Mm.
why would you say this kind of communication with ourselves, right? Because you use the words, the vocabulary, self-communication, and then ultimately self-liberation, right?
Mm.
In terms of a wellness perspective, how is it detrimental, right? You've cited real world, examples, right? Like, in what ways have you seen or observed it being detrimental to a person's life?
Well, in my own life, making myself extremely unhappy, and holding myself back and putting myself down to the point of feeling extremely stuck.
This video is sponsored by Betterhelp. Hey guys, this is Dr. 𝐒𝐤𝐿𝐴, aka the Chef Doc. I just want to take a few moments of your time to talk to you about something that I feel needs to give reflection and pause for. Is there something interfering with your happiness or is preventing you from achieving your goals? I know for me, I've been on the self-work journey for a decade now. And I remember in my personal experiences, through my doctor's journeys and also from traveling the world, I was always searching for the next step or thinking that happiness was a destination. However, it's not. What I found instead was that life was a process. And learning about life was also a process and a practice. And that the state of happiness and the state of joy and contentment was also a practice. For those of you who don't know, since I don't share that much on my podcast, is that I actually battle with anxiety, OCD, and in the past, episodes of depression. However, little by little, step by step, after seeking extra help, I've been able to achieve monumental things in my life that I've been eternally grateful for. BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. BetterHelp is a sponsor of this podcast. It's not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online. There is a broad range of expertise in BetterHelp's counselor network, which may not be locally available in many areas. The service is available for clients worldwide. You can log into your account anytime and send a message to your counselor. You'll get timely and thoughtful responses, plus you can schedule weekly video or phone sessions, so you won't ever have to sit in an uncomfortable waiting room, as with traditional therapy. BetterHelp is committed to facilitating great therapeutic matches so they can make it easy and free to change counselors if needed. It's more affordable than traditional offline counseling, and financial aid is available. BetterHelp wants you to start living a happier life today. Visit betterhelp.com/thechefdoc, that's better HELP, and join the over 1.4 million people taking charge of their mental state with the help of an experienced professional. Special offer for ThriveBite listeners, get 10% off your first month at betterhelp.com/thechefdoc, THECHEFDOC. Thank you for listening, guys, and back to the episode.
And all too familiar with, as I would put it to the clients that come to see me for help when I describe my own process, because it helps them to understand where I'm coming from with this, is that I became familiar with the feeling of sitting in a cold, damp, soggy, shivery puddle. And that somehow I believed that was my lot in life. And each time I ended up back in that puddle, I felt somehow like this is where I'm supposed to be. Like this is just the way it is. And there was a strange sense of, like, a warped sense of comfort and familiarity with it. It's very strange what people normalize. That people normalize abuse, whether it's inflicted by other people or from ourselves toward ourselves. We normalize that behavior and think that somehow it's okay. So it can be terribly detrimental to the point where that those kind of negative self-communications, self-abusive self-communications, lack of self-worth is extremely common. The most common phrase I've heard over all the years of working with people is the belief, I'm not good enough.
Yep.
And in so many different cases, so many different types of people and backgrounds and experiences that they may have been through, but that's a really common pattern. I'm not good enough. And so in some cases that can be held so strongly, that belief, and it can cause such a downward spiral. For escape, people turn to drink and drugs and various other things as an escape, and then that just compounds the issue. And then eventually sometimes people feel such a sense of despair that they think, well, what's the point? And they consider taking their own lives. And I have worked with a good number of people over the years who've been in that state when they've come to see me, and yet when it's explained clearly to them that they are not the stories that they've picked up along the way, that they've been telling themselves about themselves. That's a different thing. That's the clutter that's accumulated largely due to circumstances outside of our control, i.e. other people's ignorance or abuse or neglect. But that has nothing to do with who that human being is beneath that clutter. So it becomes a process of rediscovery, identifying the clutter, removing the clutter, and so that creating a sense of separation between the sense of self in the individual and the clutter that's accumulated along the way, because that's not them.
It's almost when you're describing that, I was picturing layers and layers of jackets and blazers, just kind of compiling on that person. And it's almost like that, or I think of an onion, it's like you're, taking off the layers to kind of get to that core of that human being. So from this, what you've been saying, it makes me think of our current times. We're currently in our third year of the pandemic. Obviously, everyone has an idea of what it has done globally in terms of mental health cases and, things like that. Would you say, I'm going to kind of meld this into one question, two different questions, is with that kind of context, do you find it, more important now than ever to be able to change this type of dialogue, this type of self-communication, or narratives about how we talk to ourselves? Is it very important to, now more than ever, before the pandemic, from your work, to kind of help this because of the fact that we have this new context of a pandemic that has, kind of unearthed, just this crack foundation, whether someone hasn't sought help, sought therapy, haven't really took a deeper dive within themselves to really, take off these layers per se?
That's a really great question, Colin. That's a great question. So I think that the pause worldwide caused by the pandemic and the lockdowns, it's created a compounding in some respects of people's already existent depression, anxiety. Anxiety very much has been heightened, largely because of the world press and media and the particular spin that they put on things. But people not knowing what's going on and fearing the worst, and being fed lots of fear-based information, and being locked away sometimes out of the fear of catching COVID, not going out, not seeing family or friends. And this has a very, very strong, very potentially damaging effect on our mental and emotional well-being, but also our physical well-being as well. Not getting out, not getting sunshine and fresh air and things like this. Yeah, I lost my best friend on the 1st of December last year, and he had health issues for many years, but because of the lockdown, he basically preempted the social isolation by probably nearly a month or so. So from the beginning of March 2020, just shut himself away in his flat and hardly saw another human being in person, because he was so afraid of catching the virus because of his physical frailty. But that had a very detrimental effect on him mentally and emotionally. And he tried to be positive, but really he became very, very, very low moods, very anxious. And so I think on the one level, it's definitely created greater anxiety in many people. However, that pause where the way that we've been doing things in society stopped, and it caused us to kind of have a little bit of a break and a little bit of a reassessment period. And it also provided, sometimes people, going to work every day, you don't have time to think about yourself, your relationship with yourself. And we just get on with it from day to day, and we avoid really taking the opportunity to look at ourselves in a very courageous and open, transparent kind of way, and to look at, well, how am I within myself, about myself? How am I feeling about myself? What am I communicating toward myself from day to day? And is that helpful, or is it hindering me? Is it abusive? Is it unhelpful? And so it has actually provided many people with an opportunity to reassess things and think, okay, so here's a parallel here potentially. What in society can we now identify as a framework or an institution which is somehow dysfunctional, that doesn't really work? And if we can become aware of the dysfunction, then we have an opportunity to change it. It's when we're not aware of it that it just perpetuates. And then likewise within ourselves, we can ask ourselves the same thing. Well, what dysfunctional patterns and habits maybe have I picked up along the way that no longer serve me? If we want to, there's the great saying of Mahatma Gandhi, be the change you want to see in the world. So I think by changing ourselves, by choosing to take this, as I refer to it, as taking the courageous path, which is choosing to look at ourselves in a very honest and courageous way, to identify those unhelpful beliefs we picked up along the way, patterns and habits of negative self-communication, and then having identified them, then we can begin to let go of those habits. Because we've identified them.
Yeah, what I was thinking when you were saying all that is, I definitely, agree, is the awareness. Is number one, the awareness, and then number two, prioritizing to kind of process what you have been through, the talk, the communication, the narrative, and then finding solutions, or at least seeking help and support to assist you, right? And what I was thinking of when you were saying is that, my observations as a GP, as a family practitioner, and having, cross paths with thousands of people, is the fact that I think modern society, especially Western, modern civilizations, tend to just be distracted, especially in our current informational social media age. Very distractful, very noisy. And we also tend to really keep ourselves busy. Sometimes to the point of not even being productive. We're just conditioned to just be busy. And when you're describing how, actually, pausing, taking the time out to break it down, that takes time. That takes space. That takes solitude, right? And in this modern era, it's challenging. You almost have to carve it out of your busy schedule the way you would carve out, physical activity, exercise, and going to the gym, right? So to me, it's, kind of sad in a way. But that's kind of how we, operate. That's number one. The second thing I thought of is lack of resources, self-improvement, personal development, self-care. These were not concepts that were taught to me, growing up, right? It was not taught to me during any of my grade school, everything, medical training, things like that, I don't know how it's, taught or not taught in other societies and, countries outside of the US, but this is, what I've, observed. So it's a couple of things, it's awareness, the time to process things, and having the tool set, the toolbox of resources. And, it's one of the motivations of why I created this platform, one of the motivations of why you created, your process, right? Which leads me to my next question. Can you give us a snapshot on, kind of like the system and process of how you, help a client, through TDSL, or the dialogue of self-liberation?
Thank you. Well, just responding to what you just said there, I agree with you completely that there was something that was said to me by a gentleman I had the good fortune to know years ago, who was a very wise fellow, and he said, sometimes we need to take a step backward in order to move forward. Like you say, we need to carve out time sometimes from our whatever doing of things to focus on work that can really help to transform our perceptions of anything. It could be, but particularly our relationship toward ourselves and our direction in life, our happiness. And so one of the things that I say to clients very early on when they come to see me is that I have great respect for them, because they've chosen to take that step out of their daily toing and froing to come and speak to a total stranger about things which are generally very, very deeply personal. Sometimes, all too often, actually, people end up speaking about things that they've never spoken to another human being about, things that have been burdening them for many, many years. And that takes courage. It takes self-determination. And I have great respect for people who choose to have, as I refer to it, pursue the courageous path. So I would say, if a person's really fed up of feeling how they've been feeling and they want to begin to feel differently about themselves, then you absolutely need to take time to address this with the respect and the care that it deserves. Like for instance, I often say to people, if it's how wrong it is that we have been conditioned societally to, generally speaking, we'd never dream of speaking to another human being in an abusive way, spiteful way, putting them down, trying to convince them that they're rubbish. Especially, I often say, imagine a young person, like maybe a small child. If you've got children, or you have other family members or friends who have children, that if you imagine a grown-up standing over them, and you happen to witness this grown-up wagging a finger and shouting and yelling at them, saying, "You're stupid, you're useless, you're never going to amount to anything in life, you're ugly, everyone thinks you're ugly, and you're stupid, and you're always going to be that way, you're going to be a failure," we would be outraged. And we'd jump in there without a single second thought to defend that child. And yet somehow we've become conditioned to accept that it's somehow okay for us to speak like that to ourselves, about ourselves. And that's so wrong. We just have become conditioned to accept that that's somehow okay, but it's so wrong.
Mm-hmm.
So we need to address this. We need to have that same feeling of I'm not standing for that. I will no longer tolerate that, and kind of become that defender toward ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
But we need to take the time out of our normal daily routines to really begin to look at this. What have I been saying to myself about myself? What are the stories I picked up along the way? And what am I fed up with experiencing? What am I fed up with believing about myself? So, and I use a lot of metaphor and symbolism and a lot of little sayings in the work that I do. So, one of them being is how can we possibly let go of something if we're not even aware that we're carrying it?
Mm-hmm.
And very often, I was unaware of how I was communicating to myself for 20 years or more of my life.
Mm.
I just believed that was it's just the way I am. And that's just how life is. But when we realize that we have the capacity to reassess this and begin to slowly identify the unhelpful stories we've been telling ourselves, and then begin to no longer drag them around with us or project them into the future in our self-communications, in our imagination, with the expectation and the assumption that we're just going to continue to repeat the same experiences and meet up with the same rubbishy experiences in life, or believe that we're just going to continue to be a failure, or an even worse failure in years to come.
Mm. Awesome. Yeah, no, I love how we've been able to kind of break this down in terms of the essence of that kind of self-communication, the language, the narrative. And it's super, super important to take a pause, to really dive deeper, even when it's scary, even when, we don't want to address certain things. We keep it hidden, like under the rug or in the closet, and never want to look at it again. And we've been conditioned by society, by sometimes family, your community, cultural background, to really, really, like we talked about, give so much praise towards the positive attributes and not really talk about the negative, quote unquote, attributes, instead of converting that or transforming that language into something where you learn from, you grow from. And you're absolutely right.
Yes.
I agree with you where, that's where the growth happens, is where, you meet a certain challenge or obstacle. And in this case, we're referring to the language and the mental and this, self-talk. These can represent challenges that we have to metaphorically jump over. So, I love it. We can talk on forever. I want to, hear a little bit about, before we conclude, how you personally thrive in your own life. This is a podcast about creating a thriving mindset. So, obviously we, have gone deep in terms of, your overall learning, eventual professional, process. But are there other things that you do to kind of supplement, to help you, better thrive in your own life? And then let us know, how do people reach out to you? How do they find your work?
Okay, thank you. One thing that's really, really important is the practice of forgiveness. We need to learn how to forgive ourselves for whatever mistakes we may have made in the past, or misjudging things, or failures. Because how could we possibly learn? We didn't know any different at the time. We were ill-equipped at the time to deal with things in any different kind of way. So we need to understand that it's really important that we forgive ourselves. And therefore, through forgiving ourselves and with consistent work on ourselves over time, transforming how we communicate toward ourselves about ourselves, we can become genuinely compassionate in our self-communications, in the way we speak to ourselves about ourselves, and treat ourselves with compassion. Therefore, when we learn how to do this, then we can understand progressively how to become more compassionate in our dealings with people around us and the world in general. And I think that's what the world needs more of, is people who've learned how to overcome and transform habits of unnecessary suffering and self-persecution, so that we can learn how to counterbalance those forces in the world, really. And it's by changing ourselves that we can begin to do that. So for me personally, I have a regular practice. I practice Qigong, which is Chinese therapeutic exercise and meditation. And I've been practicing this and studying this since I was about 17 years old. I'm now 56, coming on 57. And I love it very much, as well as a number of other martial arts. And I am a student of a gentleman who has a school in Columbus, Ohio in the USA. His name's 𝐒𝐤𝐻𝐿, and I study what he refers to as the three current tradition, which is with reference to his three teachers. But in particular, I study an art called Liu He Bafa, 6 Harmonies, 8 Methods boxing, and its common name is water form. And it's a very beautiful, beautiful art. And it's deeply philosophically intriguing as a study, and it's something which I find is very healing, to take time in the day to move and to breathe, to study structure, fluidity, softness, yielding, gentleness, spontaneity. And these kind of things. This helps me greatly. And I'm also a musician. I've been playing bass guitar since I was at the same age, 17 years old. I love it very much. It's my therapy. And so anything involving physical movement, any of the movement-based arts, I thoroughly encourage people to move and celebrate the fact that we have the ability to move. In whatever capacity they're able to move. I've worked a lot over the years with people with various types of limited mobility, with Parkinson's or multiple sclerosis in particular, and elderly people with various kind of age-related challenges. And it's still a wonderful thing that we can maybe sit in a chair and still move and breathe and exercise the body, and harmonize the emotions and work with the mind as well, focused mental work as well, training the mind. So these kind of things make me happy, keep me engaged and celebrating being alive, really.
Yeah. Super important, more profound, in our current context. So how do people find you and your work if they wanted a consultation?
Well, I would ask people to get in touch via the website that I have, which is learntdsl.com. Learn TDSL. TDSL is an abbreviation for the Dialogue of Self-Liberation. So yes, learntdsl.com. There are various courses available where I teach the understanding and the specifics of this, how to transform the quality of our self-communications. And I also work with individual clients and small groups as well.
Great.
We're also, I say we, it's myself and my dear friend and business partner, Peter Truman, who's in Cambodia. And we're in having talks with a publishing company with a book which we're creating at the moment about this. So we'll provide details of that as and when it becomes available on the website.
Great. That sounds exciting. Cheyne, thank you so much for taking the time out to kind of go over this very, very important topic. And I'm sure a lot of our audience members have gotten a lot from it. I've definitely gotten a lot from it. and take the steps, whether it's on their own or with the assistance and support of others. Hopefully they can go towards your direction and kind of get more insight to themselves, and just honestly go back to the beginning and first steps of their own healing process. I think that's pretty much what the world needs, is a lot more healing, instead of, really breaking each other down in so many different ways. So I thank you very much for taking the time out, to spend with us today.
Thank you very much indeed, Colin. It was a great pleasure speaking with you.
Same here. Guys, thank you so much for watching this episode of Thrive Bites. If you like this, please like, comment, and subscribe. And if you feel that this was a benefit for someone else, please let them know. And until the next episode, please say goodbye to Cheyne for me.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Hey guys, thank you so much for watching that episode. We hope that you enjoyed it. If you like this, please like, follow, and subscribe. And please follow us for the latest updates for this season, season 5. And if you feel that this was a benefit for someone else, please let them know. And please follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify Podcasts, and YouTube. And thank you so much again. And we will see you on the next one.